So high margin items are things that are not brand name, they're private label, things that I can produce in a low cost country and bring it over to North America and be able to sell it at much higher margin. So those are kind of the margins that we were working at. Fulfillment sourcing, you're operating more at about 38 points. So this is where you're using a middle source to get readily available inventory that's already in North America so that you can fill in to get those extra sales for the last part of the season. So there's and then obviously you want to use less of the infill sourcing. You want to get accurate as to what that buy plan would look like. And that's where things like demand forecasting, demand planning, replenishment, and allocation are all big core components of retail and how to manage that inventory and how to figure out what a season's going to look like, which is very difficult, especially when you're doing these buys, especially if you're doing import buys. That's a year in advance. So if I'm selling through blanket sleepers and I'm getting ready to clearance them out by January 1st, I've already been, before Christmas, committing to the next year's buy on what I think I'm going to sell because the factories have to get going and they have to get ahead of the curve. So you think about statistics and forecasting. This is kind of the stage in my career where I kind of started getting into the statistical and forecasting and analytics side of the business. We didn't call it analytics in those days, we just called it statistics, which was a pretty fancy word. And we would use different analytics and models to try to figure out a more accurate pictures of what we should buy and how we should distribute them. Because again, when you're thinking about an entire country, you've got multiple distribution centers. So in this case, we had 6 that we were using for apparel products that you're trying to stage and move goods from port, which is usually the Port of Los Angeles, and bring them into your different distribution centers. You're trying to apportion those out using some sort of statistics to make sure that you're feeding the stores serviced by those areas as accurately as you can. So I did that for a while. I did the leadership at the company recognized that I had an ability to analyze and create these models. I was one of the few people that were doing it. Most people were just kind of doing their job. And I was creating these models, so I kind of swept into another area of the business, which was working closely with IT and the business to create better workflow capabilities, tools, and assets for merchandise planners to be able to do their jobs as well. So I played a few leadership roles in those areas. About 1996, I was about ready to make a move, and I wanted to kind of get the family back out to the West Coast. That's where I was originally from, and so I got a call to interview with a company that was a 15-person startup in Seattle, and it was, a lot of people in those days thought I was a bit crazy. This is 1996, so this is before startups was in fashion. People are kind of looking at me like, why would you give up a company that makes $32 billion a year, 400,000 resources, associates that work for it, and go be a 15-person startup in Seattle? It's like, well, because it's new, it's different, and I want to do something different. So that became chapter 2. So chapter 1, retail. Chapter 2, technology. So went to work for a technology company which was really starting to get ahead of the curve on the area of things like forecasting, demand planning, inventory management, from stores all the way up to centralized merchandising. And what we had was relatively bleeding edge at the time, and it allowed me to play a both product manager role. So product manager in technology is more about understanding what the customers and clients are going to want in terms of requirements. What we see as an industry practitioner, because at that point in time, after spending a number of years in retail, I was an industry practitioner. Being able to fuse those things together to understand what a product roadmap would look like. So you have a base set of products and functionality that you have in your applications to do things, and then you move forward to expanding that set functionality and capabilities. So because it was bleeding edge, it gave me a chance to travel much further. So instead of those 8 states that I had back in the old days in retail, I was traveling to Europe, New Zealand, South Africa, working with retailers with this new set of technology, new set of capabilities to manage inventory and to be able to do a much better job of driving more efficient levels of working capital and driving gross margin improvement is really the 2 key points that you're trying to do with technology and capability sets like that. So I did that for a while, and there was probably about 3 different companies involved in that. There was one where I did that. There was another one which was more e-commerce based, because at the time e-commerce was starting to make a push. Then I did a order management system for grocery retailers, which drew a bunch of independent retailers together in an order management system and helped them negotiate better deals with suppliers as a collective group versus an independent retailer trying to negotiate. So we gave them kind of the same power as a larger retailer could.
Did you have to find your clients yourself, or they supplied you the clients?
Yeah, we did have to find a lot of our own clients, yeah. But again, as an industry practitioner, you, and one important thread throughout all these chapters as I go through them, always remember this in your career, is networking. And being able to meet and understand and work with people as you move through your career. What you'll find in this industry is a very small industry. So even though I started in the States and I'm here in Canada, we all know each other. At the end of the day, I mean, there's people from the States that come up and take executive leadership roles here. There's people in Canada that take executive leadership roles in the UK and the US and Australia. And what you find is you start to know people throughout this ecosystem. And when it comes to the depth and breadth of relationships, that is probably almost as important as anything in terms of growth in your career. It's really getting to know and network and develop relationships with the people that you work with. As an example, when I'm going to London, England in a couple of weeks, and I go up to the northern side of England to connect with a bunch of people that I used to work with back in those technology days. So it's, and you keep those relationships going. It's more than just a LinkedIn connection, right? I mean, you actually, you have to talk and say how you're doing, how are things going, that kind of thing. So it's important to keep those relationships going. Chapter 3, I joined a firm called Accenture back in 2004. And Accenture had just gone through a IPO. We're known as Andersen Consulting. How many people in here know what the Big 4 are? Few? How many can name them?
KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, Ernst & Young.
Okay. In those days, there was a Big 6. So Andersen Consulting was one of the Big 6. KPMG used to have KPMG, Pete Marwick. Price Waterhouse used to be Price Waterhouse. Cooper's Lybrand used to be on its own. That merger happened, and then IBM got into the game through professional services. So you kind of had this Big 6 out there for a while, and then the consolidation kind of started to begin. IBM and Accenture are still big players out there. Most people know Accenture as a systems integrator, one that goes out and kind of screws in systems and walks away. But they actually do a lot more than that. They do strategy consulting, they do management consulting, as well as technology. So the differences in those are technology is really about being able to help a company install a system that's going to help run their business better. Okay, so if you're in retail, you're going to hear about systems like SAP and Oracle and JDA, Workday for payroll and HR. You're gonna hear about these systems. These are kind of the baseline systems that help run the retail and consumer industry. So Accenture and IBM are known for helping lay down the pipe really for these systems. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, and there are millions of dollars for these projects. As an example, Loblaw is actually, I think still now, the largest retail SAP installation on the planet.
Wow.
They've spent probably the most money on it, and it is by far the largest. SAP, by the way, is just not a cheap system to install. It's very expensive because it's complex. And like any system, it started out in manufacturing, so this is another kind of important caveat. All of these systems, there's very few systems that actually start off in retail. Most systems actually start off in manufacturing, and retailers look at those systems and they go, I need to do that. And then they start to get morphed into a retail-centric environment. So I went with Accenture on the management consulting side because I wanted to kind of move away from technology and get back into the business side. So I figured I'd take chapter 1 and chapter 2, business and technology, bring them together, and start doing some management consulting, which is really about helping companies drive more value out of their business. So above and beyond just the technology piece. Part of it is technology, but part of it is just the ability to help them think differently about their business. And if you think about retail and consumer, especially retail, it is an ever-changing, disruptive business. Common denominator of retail, and I learned this back in my Kmart days, is change. You will always be changing in this industry. It will always be doing something different. It will always be disruptive. So that's what I started doing. I specialized a bit in supply chain, which is really more around the forecasting, demand planning, replenishment into the supply chain. I didn't really get too involved in distribution centers. I did here and there. And then I morphed back up to merchandise planning and started working with clients on the merchandise planning area. So I worked with Accenture and developed into a role called a principal director, and I was one of the North American practice leads, which again, heavy traveling, but this time just in North America. So I had a client in Mexico, I had clients in the US, and I had clients here in Canada. And the other interesting thing about retail and consulting is you're hardly doing anything twice in this business. It's always something a little bit different and a little bit newer. But you're building on everything that you've been doing in the past. So you think about, I'm working with a client today that is a company that went through a merger and acquisition. They're still running their business as multi-business, but they want to change their business into a singular business, multi-format. So in other words, they want to keep some of those brand names at the store level that the customer can identify with. But what they don't want to do is they don't want to be operating as different businesses because that's too much overhead, right? I have people buying the same product from this business as I do from this business. So my inventory or my working capital becomes incremental and it becomes too large for the company to hold.
What would be an example of that? A company that's an example of that?
Well, the example is Lowe's Rona.
Okay.
So at Lowe's, when you have almost an inverse M&A activity. Lowe's bought Rona, but Rona's bigger than Lowe's in Canada.
Really?
Yeah. So Rona buys, Lowe's buys Rona. Rona's the big guy, and they're sitting in Boucherville. And you got, little itty bitty Lowe's. I think they only had like 5 or 6 stores at the time of the merger.
Because they're American.
Right, they're based out of Mooresville, North Carolina. And so you kind of have these different businesses that are kind of running on their own. But they're all buying the same product, right? If you walk into a Lowe's and you walk into a Rona and you're looking for a 2x4, it's like the same 2x4, right? Or if you're looking for pipe, or you're looking for a faucet, or you're looking for anything that you're doing to build out your house. is the same Ralph Lauren paint there as it is in Lowe's and Rona.
Are they different pricing?
They started out as a bit different, then they started to merge in terms of pricing. So it was one of kind of the first things they started trying to get their head around as customers figured out that, oh, these guys are like together now. They should all be the same price. But you still have a situation where you have buyers in each of these groups, category managers is what they call them today. And they're buying the same product. Now they're getting better at centralized sourcing, so it's like, well, what do you need, what do you need, what do you need? And then we'll go to the procurement level and find a more efficient way of buying in terms of the scale. Well, that's fine, but there's still a working capital issue of making sure the product is combined in the distribution centers and understood across all platform of stores and channels being outside of the stores, so mobile, laptops, anything that has to do with outside of the store is a different channel in which the customer is looking for the product or engaging with the brand. So that's a situation where we're working on a different operating model, different way of thinking for that company. So that's the example.
I have another question, I'm sorry. Okay, how do everything out there in retail has to be differentiated. So even though, it's like Procter & Gamble owning two different laundry detergents, they differentiate them, but they still make money from them. So how does Rona differentiate from Lowe's? Like, I know everybody was all excited about Lowe's coming in because it was American, and they figured they'd get different product. So that's not the case then. I guess they're doing the same.
Sometimes you get a little bit more product. So Lowe's is definitely known for being a little bit more higher fashion. So you'll see that, which is a strange word to use in home improvement, but you'll see that if you go into like the lighting department. The lighting department in Lowe's is probably going to have a little bit more of the uniqueness, high fashion element to it than a lighting department in Rona.
Okay.
So that's kind of where you'll start to see some nuances. In retail, we just call that assortment mixes. So if you think about the total business and just multi-formats, you're now starting to think about assortment mixes. What's the assortment mix that should be associated with that format brand that the customer is identifying with? So maybe a little bit different in that case than it would be in a different format brand.
So what's the reason for Lowe's buying Rona and then operating in the same vicinity? Like, why would they do that? If Rona is bigger than Lowe's, you said, and Lowe's actually owns Rona, why would they buy a company that's bigger than them in that like a certain area?
Because Lowe's US wanted to gain quick penetration into the Canadian market. And if you look at the retail landscape in Canada, you have two big players, Rona and Home Depot, and you have Lowe's with 5 or 6 stores trying to get penetration into the market. One of the quickest ways to do that is to buy somebody else. So what they did is they wanted to get penetration quickly in Canada and start building that up under the Lowe's banner eventually, but Rona was such a strong brand name, especially in Quebec and parts of Ontario, that they wanted to use that as leverage to be able to grow and penetrate into the marketplace. So a lot of companies will do that. If you recall the Target case, the fastest way that Target could enter into Canada was to buy up a bunch of locations that another retailer had in the waiting.
That was Zellers, right?
That was the Zellers. So Hudson's Bay Company had closed all the Zellers. They're still holding all these lease assets. And Target wanted to get a quick foothold in Canada. And so they negotiated the deal to get a chunk of those locations.
What about a situation like before it closed down, Best Buy and Future Shop? Like, I know Best Buy owned Future Shop and obviously Best Buy, but what would they have to gain from competing against each other? Would they cannibalize each other?
So there's a lot of discussion around that. It's being discussed today at the Lowe's Rona environment. But I think it kind of depends on brand recognition and what consumers are relating to in terms of brand. category like consumer electronics is narrow enough where you probably blend and convert over to Best Buy and call it a day without too much disruption. I think in home improvement, they're still trying to figure that out. So because the home improvement is so many categories, I mean, from seasonal to building materials. I mean, you think about if you want to just decorate your house with Christmas stuff, you don't have to go to the department store at Hudson's Bay to do it. You can actually go to Lowe's or Rona, decorate your trees, buy other stuff.
Who's number one in the marketplace here? Is it Home Depot?
Yes, Home Depot is,
Okay.
not by much, but it's still edging out into Lowe's or Rona. But I think that'll change. That's my crystal ball.
And are they all they're all online as well, where you could purchase?
Yeah,
Goods.
they're all online. Some do a better job than others. So, it's, but yeah, they're all online. That's table stakes nowadays. You have to be online. You have to be able to order and be able to transact online if you're going to exist.
So would you say that the students who are graduating retail should be in tune to online aspects, getting into retail?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what you need to be in tune to is not just online, but how retail is really going to work differently as we move forward. So if you think about retail in its traditional form, it used to be a connection point between a supplier, somebody who manufactures stuff, and a customer, somebody who wants to buy that stuff. And that's what the whole purpose of retail was for like the last few hundred years. Then came the internet, and then came the ability for manufacturers to actually reach out to you and offer you something without the retailer being involved. Okay? So retail is now in this kind of gray zone in which they've got to figure out, well, what am I offering to my customer? Okay? Not every online customer or online business is going to be able to reach out to every customer and be able to scale properly. So let me kind of paint the picture of the evolution of digitally native vertical brands, or DNVB. Who can give me an example of a DNVB, digitally native vertical brand?
Did you guys learn that?
Okay, DNVB, digitally native vertical brand. Frank and Oak, Warby Parker,
That's a glass company, right?
Eyeglass.
Eyeglasses, okay.
So think about those companies. Those companies did not start by opening up a store. Those companies started by solving a customer's challenge or customer desire. Okay, so think about Frank and Oak, a little company out of Montreal, decides, men actually do want to dress cool without having their girlfriends or wives tell them how to do it. So Frank and Oak was born. And the whole idea behind Frank and Oak was to connect with guys, to kind of show them and give them ideas through social media on how they could look. Okay? That's how Frank and Oak actually started. That was the whole premise of it. Then they decided, okay, this is kind of taking off and it's actually doing pretty well. Why don't we open some brick and mortar locations? The other key to retail these days in this whole DNVB and brick and mortar environment is data. So the ability to look at all this data and say, okay, I think we can do something with a brick and mortar location. The key to the brick and mortar location was to make it different than a standard retail brick and mortar location. Now, this is where Frank and Oak did a good job starting off, but they kind of leveled off and kind of fell into the trap of being a traditional retail. But when they started off by opening, how many have been to the Queen and Tecumseh location? So you go in, there's the coffee espresso bar. I don't know if they're still doing shaves there or not, but they've got the shaving chair, as well as the clothes. Okay, so it's kind of like a place for guys to go and get a shave if they want to get a shave, get some espresso, and shop for clothes. Okay, that's That's an experiential environment, okay? So as retailers in brick and mortar environments think about success and how to move forward, they have to think about the experiential environment. How do you create a different experience for the customer? Because if you're doing it the traditional way, opening up a store, throwing clothes on a rack, and having people say hi when you walk in, probably isn't gonna work as well. Okay. Warby Parker, how many people have bought a pair of eyeglasses or well, probably nobody bought reading glasses, but I bought reading glasses.
That's our end.
Yeah, that's how many people have bought eyeglasses? What did you think of that experience? Did you go to the Queen Street store to
Queen
do
Street
that,
one.
or did you do it online?
Queen Street one. I
Okay.
looked through the selection online first,
Mhm.
wanted to sort of see what they had.
Uh-huh.
And it was very easy, because it was either one or two pricings, and then they had all their styles available for you to choose. And you can get them the same day if you don't have prescriptions, so it's just
Mhm.
super easy.
But you can't really pick them up there, can you?
No.
Right. It's still online,
Mhm.
but the four walls isn't necessarily full of inventory for you to buy something with and walk out the door. Okay? It's something that is still done online, done somewhere else. It can go to the store for you to pick up, or it can be dropped off at your house. Okay? Different experience. If you think about how companies are looking to bring product and bring innovation to the customers, it's not always about buying inventory. How many people can name another retailer that carries zero inventory that you can buy something and get it delivered to your house later?
Majuri, it just opened up on Dundas. It's like a showroom of jewelry, so you can try it on, but then you have to order it.
Okay.
And it's not really carrying into a fancy bag, but Tangerine would be one of these.
Tangerine's a perfect example. Perfect example.
Structure too?
Okay. What about Indochino? Anybody hear of Indochino? So Indochino is really a unique proposition for suits. So my first visit with Drew Green, my current role, by the way, just to kind of back up a little bit, is I'm the national lead for retail and consumer for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I joined about a year ago from Accenture to join PricewaterhouseCoopers. So this new role really gives me a chance to be very Canadian specific and work with Canadian retailers and leaders. So I met Drew. Drew Green is the founder and CEO of Indochino. In his Vancouver office, he was not wearing a suit. And of course, I walk in with my canale blazer. It's fine Italian blazer. Just trying to make sure that the guy doesn't laugh at me. And he's like, "Yeah, that's not bad fabric, but I think you would like ours." His model is get you all measured up by professional people in their showrooms to measure you up using templates. And I was a little skeptical at first. I'm like, I don't know, buddy. I don't know if you could really do that. But his materials are actually really good Australian merino wool. Okay, so he buys that in bulk for use to manufacture. But he doesn't really carry any inventory. He just makes commitments. Right? It's like, I'll buy as we go, and here's my forecast of how much you're going to need. Okay? So he doesn't hold any inventory. So a guy like me comes in, gets measured up, and then that material gets cut off the bolt, gets sent over to China, where it gets needled, and then using the templates, so it's all very high precision. China has gotten exceptionally well in needling. So those of you going into the apparel side of the business, China has some of the best needling now rivals all the needling that we used to do here in North America. So all the needling that we used to do in Liberty Village and Montreal. We still do some of it here, but we don't do as much because China has really done a really bang-up job, and they use a lot of technology and digitization to get very high precision needling outcomes. So it gets needled there. stitched, and then it got sent to my house in this big flat square box. Open it up, try it on. Again, I was very skeptical. I tried it on thinking, oh, I'm probably gonna have to go back in and, get more adjustments made. And they already warned me, said you probably wanna come back in and get some adjustments made. Tried it on and I was like, wow, I don't need to make any adjustments. This is great. Granted, I can't gain any more weight. Don't have to make any more adjustments. So it was good. When I saw him next time, I was introducing him at a conference at RCC. I said, you recognize the suit? He's like, yes, I do. I said, it looks really good. He goes, you had the final adjustment? I said, no, this is without final adjustment. So that's an example of carry zero inventory, and that's how I introduced him on stage. This is a cool, disruptive way to think about retail. Carry no inventory, provide product and experience to your customer.
Would you say Airbnb is the same kind of scenario?
Airbnb is similar. I think Airbnb is more of providing options more than it is.
They're not manufacturing.
Right, they're not manufacturing anything. You could say they're offering an experience. Sometimes it's a good one, sometimes may not be as good. It's a bit hit and miss on that platform. But,
I have one other question with Indochino. Do they not have, my parents were in the clothing business, Montreal, when it was in manufacturing and they made it in Montreal. Aren't there volume quantities that you have to do in China in order to have things made?
You can do shared contracting, co-contracting in China.
Okay.
So you don't have to necessarily, in the old days when we were doing those 500,000 dozen blanket slippers at Kmart, we were basically buying a factory
Okay.
in those days. Nowadays, there are co-manufacturers or contract manufacturers that do similar things for different people, so you don't have to be fully committed.
Oh, all right.
So Aldo would be a good case of that.
Really?
Yeah. Aldo doesn't have to necessarily commit everything to one factory. They can spread it out, and the factory doesn't have to do everything just for Aldo. Okay, so, did I finish my chapter 3 story? So chapter 3, this is where I'm at. I'm in chapter 3. It's gonna be a long chapter, so I'm not going anywhere. So consulting is basically my career. We've talked about building relationships. They're going to be important. This is a very small ecosystem. People are going to get to know you. They're going to know who you are. And if you, quote unquote, burn any bridges, in a lot of cases, there's no going back. So it's one of those types of tight communities where you're really going to want to develop good relationships and do right by each other. Retail on the e-commerce side. So again, we kind of talked a little bit about DMVB. Retail has to think about experience for your customer and doing things a bit differently versus the traditional way. You're starting to see that today with department stores. Department stores are becoming the new retail dinosaur. What's the department store model? The department store model is to sell other people's stuff. Okay? However, the major designers out there don't need the department stores to sell their stuff. Coach, Michael Kors, Saint Laurent, all of these guys do not need a Hudson's Bay to sell their clothes. Okay? Small independent designers could use that channel. And what you're starting to see today, both with Simons and with Hudson's Bay, is bringing in small independent designers to get exposure. So it's kind of their pop-up in a large store to be able to get in front of the customer and provide their product experience in their designs. So you're starting to see some of that shift take place in the industry.
Do you think highly of Nordstrom's?
What's that?
What's your thought on Nordstrom's?
My thought on Nordstrom's, well, Nordstrom is the one thing that differentiates them from the other department stores is they're not quite department, they're more specialty. They will work with smaller designers as well as high-end designers, and they excel in customer service. So
They're
that
my
is-
favorite.
That is the biggest differentiator. You can have a personal shopper assigned to you at Nordstrom, and that person will shop and they will find new things for you based on your taste and what you want and what you're looking for. And that person will, they'll email you, they'll text you, they'll call you at any time that, that you allow them to talk about what they're seeing and what's new and what's different. So that is the key differentiator for a store or a brand like Nordstrom, is the ability to service. So that's what makes them a bit unique, and they will be able to weather the department store storm fairly well. Whereas the others, the more traditional department stores, the Macy's, the HBCs, are gonna have a bit of a tougher time. And especially those in the middle of the road. So in the States, there's a ton of that are in the middle of the road. J.C. Penney, Sears, which is already getting ready to file for bankruptcy, Kohl's, those are very middle of the road department stores. Those are gonna be the first ones to burn up, because they can't survive.
Is it because they don't know who, I wonder what was the demise of Sears? Is it that they don't know who they are, they don't know their consumer, it just seems to me they don't know a lot of aspects of who they are.
Yeah, they never changed. They never made the bold changes that you need to make in retail. If you don't make bold changes in retail as a long-standing retailer, you will die. That's just the nature of this business. Because there's always gonna be somebody new that's coming up with a newer concept, and coming up with something very different.
So do you think like Hudson's Bay making the decision to invest more in like brick and mortar, like buying Saks, buying Lord & Taylor, buying a bunch of other stores like Kaufland's in Europe?
Mhm.
Do you think that was a good idea or not?
There's a lot of debate around that. A lot of people feel that it's probably more of a real estate deal than it is a business deal. There's still a little bit of leverage there because people that buy at the high end, and there's two different kind of scales of high end. There's top 1%, there's like maybe top 5%. Saks will operate at that top 1% level. So Saks is a bit of a unique differentiator. Holt Renfrew is now moving up to that top 1%. They used to be top 5, now they're moving up to top 1%. They're trying to play the same ultra luxury game. Ultra luxury consumers will be fine. Will still want to go to the department store to meander all the different designers and styles versus the one-off shops.
So a few years ago, Holtz opened up their men's store on Bloor,
Mhm.
beautiful store. And I recently read an article just a couple months ago. They said that it was quite possibly the most expensive mistake that Holt Renfrew's ever made. So they're closing it and bringing it back to the main store. What should they have done instead of opening up that $500+ million store a few years ago?
They should have kept it in the main location. What they found out is women still shop for men in a lot of cases. Even in the top 1% class, women shop for men. And they like to shop for themselves. So if it's in the same area, that synergy is there. If it's a block down the street, that synergy is not quite there. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. I think the other thing is, it was a bit of wasted space when you look at it. So they moved very quickly to the top 1% in that store, but they still only have enough selection or stuff for people to buy. I mean, I've probably bought a couple of things out of that store, but if I wanted to, buy a new blazer, buy, you know, something else, I wasn't gonna find it there. I ended up going to Nordstrom or Heath Center, or I would go to Harry Rosen. But I didn't find it there. So I think a lot of it was selection. You can't equate top 1% buyer to smaller SKU count, right? Top 1% buyer still needs their breadth to be able to make a decision. In traditional department store retailing, if you think about things like men's dress shirts, you need about 30 to sell one. The concept is still true in a brick and mortar environment where people are browsing, you need about 30 to sell one, 30 things to look at.
Do you think there's room for growth in the men's industry? Like, it seems to me when I speak to my students in my classes that girls, women, young women, like to go shopping as an experience, as an outing. They're might be in a bad mood. They want to go shopping with the girls, and guys don't typically do that. According to my really mild research, the guys go to shop when they know exactly what they want, and they'll go shop. So, you know, having separate men's stores, I guess Harry Rosen has done a good job by itself, but typically, I guess they don't really work that well with the unique men's stores. Or am I wrong?
I think you'll start to see a little bit of that shift. I mean, Frank and Oak is proving that model wrong.
Okay,
Frank and Oak is still considered a very successful men's shop. They, of course, have now gotten into women's clothing as well, but
right.
but they're proving that model is not necessarily true. Indochino, they're proving that model is not necessarily true. Men want to look good. They just need a place to go, and they want more than just Harry Rosen.
Right.
So I think the fact that a Frank and Oak or an Indochino or any of these other men-oriented stores that are popping up is going to put more pressure on the traditional outlets and places where you would have men's clothes. Okay, how come nobody's asked me about Amazon? It's the elephant in the room, right?
What about Amazon Go? Your thoughts on that one? Because I have a student that actually went to it. They found they had some glitches, I guess because it's in Seattle. So they, you pick up your fruit, you pick up your different stuff. I guess it's like Uber where you put your credit card into the app and then you're billed as you leave. But a friend of his touched an apple, got billed for the apple when they left. Not a big store. And are they opening up more? Have they found it to be successful? Okay.
So they have worked through their glitches. Their pilot store was in Seattle. How many people are Amazon Prime members? So about half the room. Okay. Which is true to our survey. We just released our holiday report at PwC, so go to PwC.com. Get our holiday report.
I'll go post it.
The holiday report shows that in Canada, it's still about half the people are Amazon Prime members versus the US, which is like a bazillion of the people are Amazon Prime members. How many people think Amazon or the concept of Amazon is just going to destroy brick and mortar completely? We have a few. Okay. What's interesting about Amazon and things like Amazon Go, and Amazon Go, by the way, was not their first brick and mortar experience. Does anybody know Amazon's first brick and mortar experience?
The bookstore, right?
It's a bookstore in Seattle. So you think about this concept, Jeff Bezos comes up with this concept, you don't need to go to a bookstore to buy books. We'll just create a web page and you go out and you'll just buy your books. That's how the whole concept started, okay? And that took off, never made any money until, I think they just started making money like a couple of years ago. But for the longest time, this company just didn't make money. They kept hammering out cool concepts and asking for money from investors. So the concept of buy books online was proving that you didn't have to go to a physical location, pick up a book, touch it and feel it. Okay? They also tried to push that a little bit further with these things called readers. Okay? So instead of having a physical book in your head, you could actually use a reader. How many people have readers or read all of the material online? Okay, very few. How many people still like to buy a book and touch and feel the pages and flip through them? Exactly.
That's what we're finding actually in the education end. We
Mhm.
keep pushing these kids to do ebooks, and they keep preferring to use a regular book that they could highlight, they could do different stuff on,
Right,
and flip the pages.
right. Plus, it looks good in the bookcase versus the iPad. Their first experience into brick and mortar was books. So if you think about something like books, the amount of inventory that you have to carry to sell a book is astronomical, which is why in the States, the second largest book chain called Borders went out of business. Barnes & Noble, which is the #1 chain and the only chain left in the US, is struggling. And they're like on the verge, and everybody's making their bets as to whether they're gonna file for bankruptcy.
So why is Indigo going into the States?
So Indigo is going to the States because they sell more than books.
Right.
They sell an experience, okay? So when you walk into an Indigo store, you're not quite sure what you're always gonna see, okay? Because they have things merchandised and adjacencies and themes that are very different than a bookstore.
Well, I work for the Indigo head office, and like, we have about 80% general merchandise and 20% books.
Right. And it's higher margin.
Yes.
And that's where the money is. Provide the experience. So look at the bags when people shop at Indigo. Are they buying books or are they buying stuff? Okay. So that's the difference.
Okay.
If you're gonna open up a bookstore, you better have data. And that's what Amazon was experimenting with. And this is the key theme of this whole story is data. Build an ecosystem of data. 20 years ago, retailers were all up in arms over the big movement of what? Can anybody guess what the big problem was 20 years ago that retailers were freaking out about? It's called Walmart. I know, 20 years ago, you guys all know. Every retailer was going, what is this Walmart thing and what are we gonna do? Because they're gonna kill us. All of our stores are gonna die, Main Street's gonna die, big box is gonna live. And all of us are gonna go out of business. What are we gonna do? The sky is falling. Okay. What happened? Retail survived. People adjusted. People started figuring out that if they would just carry something that Walmart didn't, or provide something that Walmart couldn't provide, they could survive and thrive. And that's what a lot of companies did. In those days, a lot of people would ask, well, is Walmart really a retailer or are they a supply chain company? And you think about it, are they really a retailer or a supply chain? There's just points of distribution with these products at the lowest price. Is that retail? Or is that supply chain? Same question could be asked today. Is Amazon a retailer or is Amazon a technology company? How many people think Amazon's a retailer? Shopping, how many people think shopping Amazon is fun? Wow, okay. Because a lot of people think shopping Amazon is actually not fun. They think shopping is more fun than going on to the Amazon site and trying to search and pick and do stuff. That's kind of a like, oh, I'm gonna do this type of thing.
And it depends on what you're shopping, right? Like clothes,
Mhm.
I would prefer going and wearing and checking out the clothes rather than ordering online and then going through the whole return process. It's another hassle. But something like gadgets, a speaker, or something that you know, like
Mhm.
a model number and like exact
Mhm.
type of product, it's much more easier.
Yeah.
And they'll show you the recommendations, and the next thing you know, you want to buy something, and it's been 2 hours and you're just surfing. Like usually happens.
I think it's the convenience too, like you have option for 1-day shipping,
Mhm.
and like I'm not Amazon Prime user, and I think that's crazy, but I think you could just order it in the morning and it's
Mhm.
on your doorstep by night, like,
Mhm.
I think that's also a big factor to it too.
Mhm. So convenience, that's a big word I heard. And if you think about what Amazon does today, they've taken actually some of the boredom out of surfing those net pages by inventing other things that go along with it. So How many people have heard about the Internet of Things? Okay, being able to take data from devices like your refrigerator, okay, and be able to predict when you're going to order something. But even beyond that, if you think about the new machine code and AI technology that's out there, Amazon is now going to a world of being able to predict before you even think you need it, predict it, order it, have it show up, and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I needed that, before you even think about it. That's solving the convenience part of it, because a lot of people just don't want to surf through the pages.
Do you feel like Amazon is more successful in the States because their product offering is so different? They carry a lot more? Because even if you look at like some of the additional services that Amazon offers, like Amazon Prime Video, or even like I was just in the States and they had like Bethesda, Maryland, which I don't think anyone knows where that is, but like, but they had like an Amazon Prime pop-up store that I looked at, and it was like all these items from the local area, I guess like wherever like, that was around, and it was all like 4-star rated items and above that you could like select from and just kind of like have in your hand. So that was, I guess, is that their attempt at like brick and mortar, and why aren't they doing anything like that in Canada?
It's part of the brick and mortar strategy. Their testing ground is always going to be the States, because the States is the largest market. 320 million people live there, versus our 36 million. So we've got a population the size of California. We've got a landmass 3 times larger than the U.S. So things like shipping is a little bit challenging in Canada versus the U.S. The U.S. have more people, more distribution points, so it's a bit easier. It's more cost effective, and my market's larger. It's still the largest economy in the world until China like edges them out, which is coming. But it's still the place to test and test those ideas. But all of that is a theme. Okay, so the pop-ups, the first bookstore, the Amazon Go grocery store, which they're planning on opening because they've got some of those glitches worked out, is going to grow. But the theme around that is not because they're a good retailer. It's because they're good at data, and they're good at their ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. So Amazon, a lot of people think Amazon is just good at shipping. They own a fleet of trucks. They ship. They've solved the last mile solution in the States, where they ship stuff from point to point without having to rely on FedEx and UPS, which is kind of irritating FedEx and UPS now. So they're like, well, wait a minute. We used to make a lot of money off you guys. What are you doing? They've got their own fleet of trucks now. So they're a shipping company, they're a data company, and they're a warehousing company that can fulfill. Okay? It's the ecosystem. And that ecosystem is all driven around this thing called data. Being able to understand and predict off of all of those elements, what's going to get picked, what's going to get ordered, what's going to get bought by who, what type of person they are, what they typically buy, and they basically have solved the human replenishment problem. Okay, as humans, we are pretty set in our ways. I buy a dark roast coffee. I don't buy light. I'm predictable. Humans actually are fairly predictable, and based on that, they can solve the human replenishment problem. So the time that you need toilet paper, the time that you need a food refill, the time that you need products, consumable products to come into your home, that's solvable. And they're solving it by creating this ecosystem that's all centered around data. So it's data, and it's the ability to reach out to you via online, mobile, whatever, or a pop-up store, or an Amazon Go. But it's all about you, and it's all about that data.
Is it through algorithms or artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence.
Okay.
So machine code learning, which is really a form of artificial intelligence, is the next big push in retail. Being able to understand who your customer is faster than you can put the information together. So if I go back to chapter 1 in my career, and I remember the days that I was trying to figure out where 500,000 blanket slippers were going to go, I would do something called what? Statistical analysis. I would drag a bunch of data down into a spreadsheet. I would work through that data. I'd probably put some algorithms behind it, some statistical equations if I really wanted to get fancy and I really wanted to get cute. I'd be able to put all that information together to drive out what I thought was the best answer. Tomorrow that all goes away. I don't have to use any of that anymore because machine code can figure all that out. If you think about the econometric approach to statistics, I have a factor. That factor is worth this value. This factor is worth this value. If I add this equation through these numbers, it comes up to this outcome. Well, what if something changes in that factor and that factor is not valid anymore? I have to change the factor. That's the econometric approach. That's how we go in as a team of statisticians, and a lot of retailers have these teams. They're called the analytics teams, and they run through and they refresh these models so that they can still come up with the best answer based on the way something has changed in the environment. Machine code learning takes all of that away. It's not an econometric approach. It's a pattern detection approach. So it's pattern, new pattern, new pattern, same pattern, similar pattern. And it uses that to constantly update the outcomes. That eliminates the need for the econometric approach to try to figure out what the best answer is when I'm trying to run my retail business.
I have a question. So what did Burberry do wrong, where they ended up having humongous inventory, which they burnt, which I can't figure that out, and H&M also overshot what they should have had in stock. So they obviously didn't use this technology.
No, this technology is bleeding edge right now. So people are just now starting to get their heads around it. Most CEOs of retailers don't have their heads around it. They know it's out there. They're like, well, what can we do with AI? What is it? What can I do with it? If you think about the existing systems and applications that are in place today in retailers, they have these existing systems that figure out the econometric or statistical side of it. It's like, what's my forecast? What's my safety stock? You know, all of these different elements, and trying to determine how much inventory they should buy and replenish. Those are all still based on settings that you can control on the application, which is typically done by a team of people that are doing all the econometric. The next stage is to start layering in the machine code AI behind that, so it makes those decisions for them. So that you can keep those settings current and keep the precision with them. Retailers are slow to adapt, and that's why you see bankruptcies. Okay, so if you're slow to adapt, you're going to be bankrupt. You're not going to be in business because somebody is going to come up with a better concept. Those companies that have massive scale and have time to figure it out are losing time. So one of my last clients that I worked on at Accenture, I can give you the names since they're in the States, is called Ascena Retail Brands. Ascena Retail Brands owns Ann Taylor, Loft, Lane Bryant, Justice, a couple of other brands. And we were, and Accenture still is, working with the Ann Inc. or Ann Taylor Loft group to leverage machine code learning and AI behind the merchandise planning process to drive better outcomes. And because they're of scale, Ascena Retail Group is about $7 billion in annual revenue. They have a little bit of time to figure it out, but the market is keeping the pressure on. I think they're trading at like $2.60 a share. The investors are like, when are you gonna get this, figured out? But they have a little bit of time to figure it out before
They go
it
bust.
closes, right? So the ability to leverage that information is a very short window. So even the H&Ms could be out before you know it. And the Forever 21s. Forever 21, I think, is already kind of on its way. But they're still struggling with their old systems, their old way of thinking. And a lot of it is mind shift, right? I was sitting down with the president of Lane Bryant in a workshop, and we had this whole thing on this, did this big chart exercise. It's like we're putting all the competitors on a board, and I go, well, you know, which of these competitors keeps you up at night? She goes, oh, that one, that one, that one, that one. And I said, none of those guys should be keeping you up at night.
Lane Bryant is for women who are in the extra large area.
And she goes, well, what do you mean? They keep me up at night, they're my competition. I go, none of those guys should be keeping you up at night. I go, the people that should be keeping you up at night are the ones that are in someone's head right now. Because the ability to go from here to the marketplace and to get you to buy, and you to buy, and you to buy, is lightning speed. I could be in the market tomorrow. I can have my brand in your hands tomorrow, literally. Think about that. So it's not the current competitors that are out there that should be keeping retailers up at night. It's the thought that's in someone's head. It's the Frank and Oaks, it's the Warby Parkers, it's the Cottons, it's, you know, the different companies out there that are coming up with these ideas and getting them out there into the marketplace at lightning speed. Those are the ones you gotta worry about. Digitally native vertical brands can be online and up and running and serving you within days. And that is death by 1,000 cuts. And that's where retailers are going to suffer in the long run if they don't get it shifted right away, is because those 1,000 cuts are gonna catch up and they're gonna bleed it out.
Yeah, I noticed
Don't
on
make it
Inst-
sound gruesome,
Oh, go ahead.
So for the traditional big retailers, say like department stores, what do you think would be the best strategy for them to move forward? So they're either trying to catch up to internet technologies, or they're trying to expand physical locations. How would they thrive in this kind of space going forward?
I think going forward, department stores, either you're going to continue to push as a Nordstrom, as that model, or you take your thought process around Hudson's Bay to the next level, and you do become the next pop-up shop for DMVBs, so that they have a place to pop up and share their product, because otherwise you're just not gonna survive.
What's interesting is Yorkdale has taken on the pop-up shop theme and opened up a whole area. I don't know if you guys have been there. And they put in about 5 or 6 companies that are just pop-ups, new companies that have come out. And from the example of large not department stores, but shopping areas, do you find Yorkdale is innovative?
I think Yorkdale is being as innovative as they can for the day.
For the day, okay.
You know, the reality is these large big box strip centers and malls, they will continue to be under pressure. And you see that in the States. There's large shopping malls that are just vacant now. And what's interesting is you look at like the second largest world economy, China, had that build it and they will come mantra, and they've built quite a few shopping malls that have never been filled. Who does anybody know who the largest online retail technology company is? We just talked about Amazon.
Isn't it Alibaba?
It's Alibaba. That is how everybody does most of their shopping in China.
And people are also using Alibaba as they're becoming wholesalers for Alibaba. They're buying product from Alibaba and reselling it.
Right. Does anybody know how many cars Alibaba sold last year? Automobiles?
They sell cars? Wow.
They sold over 100,000 last year. Vehicles.
Wow.
And you get in and drive. Think about that. I mean, that's how fast it's changing. And the unique thing about like the Chinese market is they didn't really have a chance to kind of go through the stage of the North American stage of let's build a bunch of stores and strip centers and malls and go through that whole phase of shopping, right? They had a lot of independent retailers, okay, and they still do, and they thrive off of that. But they just kind of jumped that step, and Alibaba and Jack Ma created this whole Alibaba concept. And you're right, if you walk into a store in Beijing, you could be buying product that was sourced through Alibaba. So Alibaba has kind of become the ecosystem of Asia. And they sell everything. Everything. Absolutely everything. So if you want a car, you can buy a car from Alibaba.
I just saw an ad actually for Car Maven. Are you familiar with that organization? Now, I don't know if this part is real, but they say they have these units that you could actually buy your car from. You buy it online, and they deliver it to you. Or they have a station where they have cars in a station. That's you know.
Oh, I did hear about that, yes.
So it's an
It's
American.
like a vending machine.
Yes, a
Yes,
vending
It's
machine.
a car vending machine.
Yeah, is that real?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can order your car online, kind of get the whole thing worked out, and then you go to this vending machine. And that's my car on level 3, slot number 16. Push the button.
Crazy.
After all your finance and everything's gone through, it'll give you a code, and you pop that code in, your car goes down.
So you cut at the dealership,
Yeah.
and I imagine you get cars for less expensive amount of money.
Right, if you think about the whole, again, the retail concept was to connect consumer to manufacturer. Car dealerships are the same way, of connecting the manufacturer, Ford, GM, Mazda, whatever, to the consumer. Now I can go directly to the consumer. I don't need to go to the dealership.
Even in consumer packaged goods, they're going direct, like Procter & Gamble is offering a direct site to go order stuff.
Right.
That's huge. Oh, there you go.
Do you think something like Tmall in China, like I know H&M is on Tmall in China, do you think something like that would work in Canada, like with the Bay or something? Should that be something people should be like watching out for?
Could. I think the interesting thing about the North American market, and this is the US as well, is they're behind the curve in terms of what China is doing. If you want to see the future, look at China, because they are pushing the future. The US is behind a lot of those concepts. They're catching up, but they're behind. And you think about the US, it's like, well, that's still kind of the largest economy, but that's going to be challenged in the next few years. And you look at Europe, China is really leading the way in how things can be done in terms of commerce. So if you want to see how commerce is going to affect the world, I would look at China.
So do you see bricks and mortars eventually dying out? Like I know that I just went to Budapest and Vienna, and as a tourist, I went to stores to go shopping. And
There's always a place for brick and mortar, right? So, and even the directly native digital vertical brands recognize the need for brick and mortar. So the brick and mortar will always stay, but the way it's going to be looking in the future is going to be very different than the way you see it today. So look for more experiential spaces. Don't look for big malls. Malls like Yorkdale will continue to innovate and continue to figure out ways to drive traffic as a place where people can gather and be a community and socialize. That's the best way they're going to survive. Don't look for new malls to be getting built. Even though they're building one, I think, down in Florida right now, that's everybody's scratching their head going, wow, how are we doing this?
And what about these discount outlet malls? I mean, has that taken a lot of business away from, from the regular stores? You know, Vaughan Mills and,
It did it first, but it's just another retail segment that, again, you can probably satisfy faster online. And what a lot of consumers are realizing is in the outlet malls is you're not necessarily getting the same product as you would have gotten.
right, that's what I found out, that they actually make them special for those stores and they're not
And
the
when they make them special, that means they're not as high quality.
high quality.
So it's, it's just for the sake of buying the name if you're interested in the name only. So it's it's not as big of a thing as it used to be.
Hmm.
How many people here shop at Outlet Malls? 1, 2.
On the way to Florida. So it makes the drive easy.
Yes.
What's your opinion on Costco? 'Cause to me, Costco's kind of been a company that's been kind of set in their old ways, especially with their e-commerce.
Yep.
And like their whole business model, do you think that there's a place for that in the future? Do you think it will die out?
I think it'll die out eventually. The interesting thing about Costco is it's not e-commerce friendly, right? But they need to think about that and think about it very quickly. Because who really wants to go and buy a bunch of stuff in bulk rather than have the bulk arrive at your house? And really, that's the concept of Costco. They have certainly figured out a model to get people to pay for a membership to shop, which is, to me, interesting in of itself. Pay us money, then come and spend some money. Is absolutely amazing. And they can probably ride that model for a while. And I think once online and the age of information continues to push forward, you will see less and less people going to the Costco's because the information is already in front of them, and they'll be able to get what they need without having to go to that place, spend money for the membership, to spend money at a location. It will take a while for it to die out completely, but it will certainly reach its peak very quickly, and then it will start to level off pretty quickly. And I think we're finding it's a bit of a generational thing too. How many people in this room is actually a Costco member? I figured you would. I'm not a Costco member, by the way. And what do you normally go to Costco for? Tell me why you go to Costco.
Grocery, like, I really like the produce and meat and stuff, and then crazy, like, workout clothes, like, just like, kind of like everything.
So it's like a big pop-up shop for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Who else has a Costco? Why do you go to Costco?
Mostly I go for contacts and I go for their pharmacy, because it's actually like really low cost. Like I need like iron pills, and iron pills, like if you go to like Rexall, they're like $20 a box per month.
Okay.
If I go to Costco, it's $3.47.
Okay, so you have a very specific need.
Yeah.
Would that need be met online somewhere?
If you could find a retailer that did that for me, sure.
Okay, it's probably coming. Amazon will probably get it to you. Why do you shop at Costco?
I live with my family and we're like a lot of people, so like it works out for us.
So you buy a lot of stuff? Yeah. Okay.
Big picture idea, what if Amazon and Costco somehow created a merger, and then Costco warehouse memberships would be Prime memberships, and then
That could happen.
It's hard
So-
to